one-on-one communication occasionally with the superintendent, and I'm not going to tie my hands, and I'm not going to take all the scrupulous notes, etc. And so if we can pivot this and open up more transparency, I get that the community loves the format. I love reading too, and I love the question format and all that kind of stuff. But realistically, majority of the questions that are asked, overall, I want that to happen in the actual meeting. Like, I want the community and the dialogue to actually happen. And I really do question that it's almost on the verge of open meeting law violation, because we do have an idea, some of the way that those questions are asked, the tone, all that, etc. In a way, I know that I have in the past, like, got an idea of what I'm going to present or the replies I'm going to say with certain things. So in a way, I can see how we're like really tipping toe. And so to be honest, I am fine where it's at. Honestly, I feel bad though, because sometimes there are a lot of questions. And then not only is it just one question, there's multiple, and not only, like, it is a lot of work, I feel like, for admin overall, which is great. I'm all about asking questions, but sometimes it's like, you know, not super pivoted. And you can take this personally as an attack, I don't care, but overall, I love the transparency of that, but I'm wondering if we can just pull this more into the board meeting, which is the whole purpose of the board meeting, is for us to actively engage, ask those questions, bring all those questions. And I touched base with Superintendent Lotzenheiser, just, you know, what if board meetings are like 5 to 6 hours, you know? And I think the admin is prepped if that's the route we need to go, but I really don't want extra oversight, especially since we are, you know, we kind of we don't have an extra secretary in there and all that kind of stuff. This is where we've got to come to reality a little bit and just really see what's doable. Like, I honestly, your expectations, I don't know if we can meet. Like, even if we try to like pivot that way, it might not be there. So I'm all for the public knowing and all the kind of written stuff. And as a secretary, I'm trying to be better on my notes, honestly. Sorry, you guys, my voice is like getting weird now, but to be more thorough. So if we do have to repivot this position, then I'm gonna be more thorough on the notes, because it's true, who has time to watch the videos? Like, you know, so that's something I could pivot more, but I really am nervous about how the reality of it is it might not be doable with these expectations. Anyways, continue on.
President Wade, I don't know if I can speak.
Go ahead,
or
Ms.
someone
Schultz.
else. Okay, so Board Member Jarman, I agree with a lot of what you said. I do have a question. Because many of the questions that are sent each week are things we've already covered in board meetings or things we've already shared that I have notes on. So I don't need to know these things. If I'm wondering if you're asking the questions as because you don't remember the things or as a recollection, or if you're trying for the public to remember them. I'm just trying to understand from where you're coming from. If it's for the public, because we never did this before. This is a new thing, and I wonder how many boards put out their questions like this. Because I mean, if I have a question and it's a simple something that I've forgotten, then I don't, that I can call the superintendent or Christine and just ask her a quick question. But I don't know that everybody on the board doesn't remember that from a conversation or from a board meeting. Hopefully that all came through and made sense.
So I'm going to address a few things. So first, you said in my format. It's not in my format. I submit my questions in my format. If anybody submits their questions, it's in their own format. So I don't even understand what you mean by in format. And then as far as open meeting law violation, I'd like you to explain to me what your understanding of open meeting law violation is. Can you explain that to me?
Well, I will rest
No,
on...
I'm sorry, I'm talking
to me?
Board members Jarman.
Oh, sorry.
Board members, I did some background work on this topic, if you'd like me to jump in.
Yes, please, that would be delightful.
Okay, all right.
Well, can I finish asking my questions before you explain, please? I mean, you throw away open meeting law violation, but I'm not sure you even understand what that violation is, Vice President Jarman.
Point of order.
You can't call a point of order because you don't like what I'm saying. And as far as extra oversight, it's our job. That's what our job is oversight. And I'm not sure that you even understand what the expectations are for you to even say that. But questions are going to be asked and answers are going to be expected. And again, when they are on the consent agenda, we can't discuss consent agenda items at meetings unless they're pulled from consent. We can't pull. I had a question about almost every item on consent. I can't pull every item off of consent. Do you understand that? To be able to have a conversation. So that is why it helps to have the questions submitted and be able to get answers and allow Christine time to be able to research the answers. And it might have been a long time ago that maybe, same thing that was on a past agenda, but it's also is helpful to community to be able to pull up just this meeting and be able to see answers related to just this agenda item. So it could be a long time ago, and I do search for similar items in past agendas, but mainly, I don't believe that my question, football lighting, like we haven't had that on previous agendas. So these are answers that I would like to have. And so none of that is open meeting law violation. And in fact, if I wanted to go online and say, this is on tonight's agenda and this is how I'm gonna vote, there was actually a court ruling that says I could do that without violating open meeting law. So again, I don't think you understand what open meeting law violation is to be saying that this is an open meeting law violation to be able to do this.
Before you.
Ms. O'Brien, I was going to ask for
go ahead.
legal clarity. Is that all right? Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So just to add to the other concerns, another concern, first of all, if it's communicated to us via email, that's different than putting it out in public. And we're not talking about putting something publicly on whatever website that you're on. That's not what we're talking about at all. One concern I have, again, with open meeting law and the intent of open meeting law is that people see this stuff. I have concerns that maybe people, when we get our board packets ahead of time, that other people are seeing this before they are made public. That concerns me. I wouldn't want that stench to be attached to me, that I've done that. What I will go back to about open meeting law, and I appreciate the comments that Board Member Schultz made and Board Member Jarman made, I should not have a sense, except for the one person that I'm allowed to talk to on the school board, I shouldn't have a sense of how someone's going to be voting on an issue. And I think that's what sometimes happens in the communications that we receive. So I guess you can go on from there and explain. Thank you.
Ms. O'Brien.
All right, President Wade and board members, I've been taking notes as you've been talking, so I'm going to try to address all the things that have come up, but please remind me if I forget anything. Okay, so in general, the one-on-one meetings with the superintendent to get information about items on the agenda are very typical, right? Sharing out the information that, the questions that come in to all board members is, again, very typical. And sometimes, if there's a legal matter, I'll communicate to a governing board out kind of that one direction information, here's something that's on your agenda and here's background information about it. But remember, for open meeting law purposes, the Attorney General's office is concerned when a quorum of the board deliberates or discuss something that should be occurring in a public meeting. So if you're meeting with your superintendent and getting background information on items on the agenda, that should be that one direction information. You know, you might have questions about it, but you're not saying, I'm going to vote on this, yay. How is President Wade going to vote on this, right? Because then that would create what's called this daisy chain open meeting law issue, where essentially you're deliberating through the superintendent on items that would come before your governing board. So my understanding is that's not what occurs in the one-on-one meetings. It's just providing you with background information. The district's practice of posting the questions on its website is not something that I've seen other districts do, but I looked at it and I talked to another attorney in my group, and we don't think that that runs afoul of the open meeting law. Let's see. There was a series of Attorney General opinions about these informational meetings with superintendents in 2024 and 2025, and I provided the most current AG opinion to Christine today, and it involved what were called 2x2x1 meetings in Scottsdale Unified, and so the superintendent would meet with 2 board members, and 1 board member. And so the Attorney General's office issued a written opinion and then amended it. And I wanted to read to you one paragraph that I think is relevant to this conversation. So the Attorney General said that we recognize that SUSD and other boards may sometimes benefit from having information presented to board members in a 2x2x1 or similar format. And we recognize that merely providing information to board members in that format will not always run afoul of the open meeting law. After all, board members are not prohibited from gathering information independently outside of a public meeting, nor are they prohibited from discussing matters with another board member, so long as that discussion does not directly or indirectly involve a quorum of other board members. And so it's a hefty Attorney General's opinion with actually an underlying opinion written by my partner, Jennifer McLennan. So it's a long read, but it is pretty informative. And really, the Attorney General is saying it's fact dependent what is discussed in those meetings. So going back to those one-on-one meetings you have with the superintendent, as long as it's background information and you're not sharing with him how you're going to vote on something, that would not run afoul of the open meeting law. Is there anything that I didn't answer that you would like me to answer?
And I did read that opinion, and it is long, but I believe it's very clear, and that's what these Q&As are. It's literally asking questions about the agenda item and getting information like about the vendor and what is it that that is being presented to us, cost related, breakdowns like that. So. And nothing in the Q&A process, I believe, would be anything related to an open meeting law violation. It's literally gathering information so I can make an informed vote. And at the same time, hoping that my questions that are being asked could be helpful to other board members too, and our community when they're watching, they can understand the item as well. Again, my concern is it shouldn't matter how questions are coming in, and if they're related to the agenda, then it should be shared with all board members based on our protocols. And the option to call in a question, just because if you call it in, then it doesn't end up shared with the rest of the board, shouldn't be used as an excuse for that information not to be shared with the rest of the board, is all I'm saying.
And Board Member Van Hook, Madam President, I will say that I have not seen the practice of transcribing the one-on-one meetings for other board members. I mean, whether you want to...
Not the whole meeting, yeah, just questions, agenda-related questions.
Right, well, I haven't seen that practice, but I mean, again, as long as it's background information, that's a business decision of whether the board wants to do that or not. It's not an open meeting law requirement or an open meeting law problem.
Thank you.
President Wade, can I say a few things about this? You know, I agree that we have these communication protocols, and when you look at all the different protocols, I think it's important that, you know, if we're going to say that, make sure we're doing them, then I think that we make sure that we do all of the board communication protocols. I think what's interesting about this, I was here when it started. I don't know if any of you guys were on the board when this started. We had a former superintendent who felt like she wanted background from the questions coming from the board so that here as cabinet, we could be prepared and have an idea about what questions that we answer during the board meeting. I think there was a concern that, hey, we ask a question and then we as the people in here might have to say, I don't know, let me get back to you. But that was the intent of it. The intent was to give us your questions early. We'll be able to be prepared for them. We can share them back to you. And then when you ask them in the meeting, we have an answer ready to go. They weren't posted publicly. They were an internal document that we used to make sure that people were prepared. And then a few years ago, we changed it to posting it publicly. But I don't think that when I came on board, the idea was, and I've offered it to all of you, come in and let's talk about this, because I think when you have discussions, which is why I'm really happy we're having this discussion tonight. Here we are in public. You guys can never have discussions unless you sit here, right? Like that's the hard part, really, and it's hard being, I think it's hard being a board member, wanting to have discussions, but you can't. We have to have it in the open. We have to have it transparent. The most transparent place that we have within our district is right now, where everybody can see what that conversation is and going forward. And so, you know, when we have discussions or we review and people want a preview of the governing board agenda and we go through it, I think that that's a great way and a learning way for board members, because each one of you, because I know each one of you, you prepare all differently. All of you guys prepare for board meetings differently, but you prepare in a way that come to be able to present and move forward. But just the background on these communication protocols, right? That was the intent, was to provide it so that when you came and you did ask that question ahead of time, it wasn't for, do we have a forward-facing document? That was added after that was put in. And I think the reason we have, Board President Wade and I, when we discussed this, to make it an action item, because truly, I want to do what the will of the majority of the board says and follow through. And so when we have action taken tonight, then that'll help serve what we are doing in order for board members to be the best prepared that they can to make informed decisions about the future of our district and what's happening within our district.
Yeah, and President Wade, may I? So right after my term was up is when this protocol came into play, and it wasn't for, I don't think it was developed for every single question that we have. It was for big questions that would benefit the public to know, like big ones. So like, for instance, in the past, I have asked you, like, I think it was last December or maybe the December before, I can't remember, but the electricity bill was a little bit higher for the pool at Higley High, and I was like, why is it so much? Well, it was a state swimming tournament. So I asked you that question. I mean, I can inundate with thousands of questions, but I need to be comfortable about the things upon which I vote, and I need to be knowledgeable about those things. And again, Councilor O'Brien, I think it's the way that some of these questions are asked. I'm uncomfortable knowing how more than one board member is voting on something ahead of time. I'm uncomfortable with that. I feel like I should learn that here after discussions.
First, thanks, Ms. O'Brien, for giving us the information and helping to clarify that. I have several things that I would like to say, so I apologize. I guess the first issue that I have is the statement that the process that we're doing is not transparent, in that the entirety of the time that I've been on the board, this policy was in place for the questions because the superintendent who was here when I arrived on the board had that policy in place, and we changed it to make those public. So the public could see the questions that the board was asking, because ultimately you had complaints that the board seemed as if they were just approving things, and the statement was board was asking questions that maybe the public wasn't aware of, and so this is where we are at. What it feels like, Ms. Van Hook, is that you are unhappy that we aren't following or doing things in the exact same way that you do, when, to be clear, we get the questions, and to Mr. Glover's point, that are dealing with data and numbers and those kinds of things. The superintendent, it comes in the superintendent report all the time, in that I have asked questions in our meetings at times, whether they were, if they're an agenda item, then we're gonna talk about it in the board meeting, and so it gets put up on there. I'll even say, you know, Ms. Zimmerman, you can put that one on there kind of deal when it's an actual question that I have on a board. Most of the time when we meet, the questions that I have are in the presentation. So if I just sit here and listen, I get the answers to my question, because that's the way the presentation is supposed to go. That's the information items with which we have in front of us, and that's how that policy takes place. So those questions that I have, when I say, hey, is this there? And you go, it's the next slide over, that does not have to be put in what is already a ridiculously long document in terms of the questions that go online. There is nothing that's not transparent about that. In fact, the information is publicly displayed. So it feels as if that you think that in these meetings, certain kinds of questions or things that are happening or taking place that are not, because we don't have the same amount of questions that you do. We don't. To Ms. Schultz's point, some of these questions are repetitive, i.e. the consent agenda is long every summer it is. Every summer, our consent agenda is overwhelmingly long at the end of the year and the start of the year, because we have things that come up annually and we do them over the summer, so that's why they're longer. We've actually literally had complaints about how long it has been before with you on the board in my time here, and the explanation again is that they are policies that come through annually, and that's why they are here. To be clear, if you have an issue, you can, and we've done it tonight, always can take them out of consent agenda and move them. We did this because at one point legal talked about how consent agenda is not a time to debate and hash out, which is why we removed them. Whether or not we keep the practice, to Ms. Jarman's point, I agree. The burden that is on our administration team to answer some of these questions that ultimately don't always impact our ability to do our job. So for example, keeping with consent agenda item, there are sometimes staff travel to conferences, and the questions are the company that is putting forth the conference and questions about that company. How is that pertinent to us and our ability to do our job? If the argument is sometimes staff will be given information that they should never bring into our classroom, they are upheld to our policies to not bring it in our classroom. They are adults doing their job. So asking those questions are in fact repetitive and insulting, to say the least, with respect to the professionals that are doing their job. I struggle when we say things like, we are not transparent. As a district, we are overwhelmingly transparent, overwhelmingly. The questions and the concerns and the things that I have, when I have questions that deal with data, that deal with specific information, they either end up in that report because I put it there when we were meeting in the first place, or they come in the superintendent's report on that Friday, or sometimes if it's an immediate question, like if we get an email that's concerning something, I will call Mr. Lotzenheiser and say, hey, we just got this, can we send something out to the board? And then it gets sent out. We are following this communication protocol. The idea that our meetings, which I am grateful that Mr. Glover, Ms. Jarman, I have to do it as a board president, and fun facts, I will always do that now, even if I'm not the president, because it does make me feel more prepared, having the ability to go through it in a less stressful environment than what this is, and that's great. I think I agree with respect to the gray area of open meeting. I find the idea that we can know, or that you would even post publicly, this is how I feel, I find it to be gray. I find that the policies and the laws that were in place before social media, before our phones are the way that they are, and I think that's great. And while courts are trying to keep up, things change constantly, and that, I agree, Mr. Glover, makes me feel uncomfortable because I like to follow the law. I think the ultimate question is whether or not we are following this protocol. And I recognize how you feel, Ms. Van Hook. We are a board of 5. I do not believe that the district is not following the communication protocol as it is written, especially considering the fact that we have what feels like a 10-page question response for this meeting alone here tonight, and how long and how much time and effort that must have taken our admin team I still feel as if we are following this protocol. So I think for the purposes of our meeting, for the purposes of continuing, I think the question comes down to, A, how do we, as a majority of the board, feel about this protocol? Are there changes we desire to make, if any, and maybe focus on where those changes are so we can continue rather than just saying the same things over and over again?
Yes, Madam President. So along those lines, I agree. Ms. Zimmerman, can you pull up policy BEDBA? Because I think I've pulled it up correctly in this new version of board docs. But let's take a look specifically at the policy, because what's been given to us is different than the policy. And so that's the process. And so if we want to talk about the process and change the process, yeah, please, because it's a lot less. It's a lot less specific. It doesn't say most of the things we've been talking about.
Mr. Glover, while she's doing that, for clarification, this policy is what governs this, because this is just protocols, right? This is just something we've said we're going to do.
Sorry, President Wade. On this page in the communication protocols that we got, I think it's page 1, 2, 3, 4. There's item number 2A, and it says board members will call or email the governing board secretary with questions. So if we want to tinker with that, I would just say, I would change the wills to may and sort of leave it at the discretion of the superintendent and the board member if they feel that it's, something that's conducive to, for the greater good of the benefit of the public, like a public good. So, but this is very short, and it doesn't say most of the things we were talking about emailing or anything like that. So that's the policy, okay? So then we're talking about the processes, and if we want to change the process to something more, able to be handled, I guess, efficiently and effectively for all of us, we can change the wording of that process, but the policy doesn't say anything about what we've been talking about.
I guess for the board members, I look at it as, I recognize there's an aspect of this that our district admin cares about. And to be fair, I do care about your labor and I care how you feel about it. I'm not asking that in this moment, so for that I apologize. Let's just stick to us up here. I do not believe that we are running afoul of our processes, in that I believe our district has been very communicative with respect to issues or questions that we have that are pertaining to information that the board doesn't currently have access to. That matters, because if I'm asking a question that's not in here, that should absolutely go to everybody. And every question I have had that would pertain to that, no matter how I have asked that question, has ended up either in a superintendent report, a random email. One issue, I think Sherry called us to talk to us about it, but that was because things were happening in a very crazy fashion at the time. But again, I don't believe that we are not doing that. Has anybody asked a question that you're like, nope, never ended up in here? Okay, so again, I guess my question then is, how is it that you reasonably expect the district to do more than what is already being done in terms of 5 individuals who our job is to do what we need to do to prepare for this information and prepare to come up here, and how we choose to do that?
Okay, so I'm going to address a few things you said. First of all, I never said we are not transparent. So that is not accurate. You're also, you mentioned that, about open meeting law, that we like to follow the law. Are you insinuating that I don't follow the law? Because I know open meeting law, and I know how it works. And I absolutely do follow the law. And you just agreed with me that if a board member is asking questions, that absolutely it should be shared with the rest of the board, which is my entire intention for this. And my experience differs from all of you. So I am going to have different questions when it comes to agenda items based on my experience. And the current, all I'm saying is that the current approach creates inconsistency, because if board members are asking agenda questions, then it should be shared with the entire board, just as it states on our communication protocols in section 6B and section 2AI. That's all I'm saying. It's in here, and it should be followed. So I think you guys are kind of, I'm not even sure what you're trying to create out of this. All I'm asking is that the communication protocols be followed, and if there's an agenda question, then it's shared with the entire board. And I mean, you can go ahead and change will to may. That does not change the fact that information has to be shared with the entire board.
Mr. Lotzenheiser, for clarification.
Yep.
Questions that are pertaining to the agenda. And to be clear, I have questions sometimes that are like, does this say this? And you're like, yes, it's right there. So to be clear, that's not a question that should be sent out to the board. That's bonkers. I just wish to express it, because outside of that, questions that pertain to the agenda that are not already in the information we have in front of us are shared out. Is that correct? No matter how those questions were asked.
Yes. Here's how we've done it. Obviously, when we get an email address or email, we can look at it and respond. When we're having a conversation, a lot of times those questions aren't the things. Governing Board Member Van Hook, when you sent the questions in, there might have been 7 different questions pertaining to a different thing, very more specific. Those aren't the questions that's happening. But if there are questions that require us, or I have to go back to the staff and say, hey, we have an issue with something. Sharon, I need you to look this up, find it. Whether it's about a board agenda or any kind of question that we get. That's why you'll see it in status, and that's why you'll see it come forward in status. With the Q&As, the timeliness of that is a quick turnaround when we get them on Monday morning, and we go through as a cabinet and say, here's who's going to be assigned to do the different things, to look at it. But having a conversation, and that's why I think what's nice, even right now, is demonstrating this, where you are all having a conversation together. It's not one-way communication. Right? This is the ability to have an answer given and then somebody else come back and have an answer, and to get back and forth, which I think is a healthy thing for a group of people to be able to do. And so when those one-on-one preparation meetings are simply going through the agenda and seeing some of the presentations before they come here, because it's the same exact information that would be presented to go to every single person going there. You know, and I think that, again, each board member is going to be prepared and prepares, to your point, Governing Board Member Van Hook, your background and experience is different than other people's background and experience is different than the next one. So you all have different perspectives about how you perceive things and look at it. And I think it's our job to get you as prepared as possible. And if it is for you to send in the email, then those questions, that's great. And we'll continue to work on and answer those questions. If it's to come in and have a one-on-one meeting with us, a lot of you guys do use Christine as an email to Christine. Perfect. Then we can get that and we can work and we can respond. Sometimes it takes a while. There's a lot of different things that happen in order for us to get there. But I don't think, and I guess the intent of the discussions that we're having in the one-on-one meetings, we're very, very careful that it cannot be any kind of daisy chaining, or I never ask you how you're going to vote. I know that that is super taboo, and I don't want to. Why? Because I think it's really important that you guys come up here or up there And that's where you get to say it and answer it to us. And so, you know, questions that come at board meetings that we respond, and we have to be prepared because that's our job, right? And how we can go through it. And at the same time, we also know that if a question comes up that we have to say, we'll get back to you, then we get back to you and we get it back to you in status.
President Wade. Board Member Van Hook did mention consent agenda items, and it is really helpful. It is, especially if we're going to do it all pass vote on that, that is helpful to get information ahead of time. Again, I'm not against this. I just don't like the push that I'm doing something wrong. Honestly, I feel that I'm being very proactive. I have asked questions in the past via email to Christine. She's answered them. So I really do like I'm fine with the format that we're at. I'm just kind of stating how I was kind of feeling about things and how sometimes those questions are, I mean, there's quite a bit. And so, but I do utilize that service or, you know, so I'm kind of fine where we're at. I don't like to be just basically controlled in a way, I guess is how I could put it. Thank you.
I think for clarity, and again, so we can make some sort of movement here, then it sounds like, Ms. Van Hook, your concerns are already being met. Like the idea that we aren't fulfilling this policy does seem disingenuous in that I at least participate in my meetings whenever I have a meeting, whether that's with Mr. Lotzenheiser and or other folks I've asked to come in for different things so I can understand stuff because I didn't know it ahead of time, and then that helps me ask questions in here or helps me understand what's going on. Again, any question that I have had that is information pertinent to an agenda item that's not in the agenda item information that is collected already to begin with has always been shared with the board, no matter how that question has come in. So I don't really know then what the point of this conversation is, in that if your goal is to ensure that any questions that we are having that pertain to a specific thing where that information is not already presented to us and has to be answered, gets shared. Or, to Ms. Jarman's point, and again, I apologize to the admin for the sheer volume of some of these questions sometimes, or how difficult can be, whatever, that is done. That's part of our process. It's part of this, and we're here doing it. This is year 4. No, you've done it longer than that, but posting it's longer. Posting it's year 4, whatever that is. We've been doing it for a few years now. So it doesn't feel like there needs to be any changes then to what it is that we currently have, unless there is some other change that somebody wishes to propose, because it seems as if we're honoring that protocol already.
Okay, so what's weird to me is the fact that it doesn't matter what I say, you guys turn it into something controversial when the intention is not controversial. So what kind of initiated this is several meetings ago, I believe it was Mr. Glover that said it was when we were looking at curriculum adoption, and Mr. Glover said, you know, I contacted superintendent and I asked a bunch of questions related to this item. And then afterwards, I was like, okay, well, if he asked a bunch of questions, why weren't his questions shared with the rest of the board? Because maybe coming from a teacher's perspective, maybe those questions and answers would have been helpful to me. And the answer that I received from Mr. Lotzenheiser was that if the questions come in by phone or in a one-on-one meeting, then those questions and answers aren't shared with the board, which then prompted me to look at our communication protocols, which it doesn't specify how the questions come in. It just says if the questions are asked, then it's shared, the information shared with the board. And all I'm asking is that we follow our protocols. that if questions are asked, share it, because it could be beneficial to other board members. And so I never said you're doing something wrong. I never accused you of anything other than the fact that if these are our protocols, let's follow them. And if you don't want to follow our protocols.
President Wade.
Excuse me, I'm talking. If you don't want to follow the protocols, then maybe we change that. But to make this a bigger issue than it actually is mind-boggling to me, because that's not what I'm saying, and that's not what I'm asking. I'm just simply saying these are our protocols, and let's follow it. That's it. And as I stated already, I don't believe we need to change the protocols. I'm just asking that we follow them as written.
President Wade. In 2A, it says we'll call or email.
Did you have a follow-up for that, or? Okay, so here's what I want to say. First of all, you have made it an issue, Board Member Van Hook. So here's what I think you don't understand. How do you know how do you know my questions weren't presented? So when I bring something to the superintendent, then the staff then might adjust their presentation and mention the points that I wanted to mention. I'm not the type of person that needs credit for asking a question. I want to make sure the information goes to my fellow board members and to the community. So sometimes when I bring something to Superintendent Lotzenheiser's attention, maybe he brings it to Mr. Armstrong, and maybe I say to him, and I have said to him, you should mention that during your presentation, which then covers the thing that you're saying. I just don't think, again, I don't mind the what, where, and who questions, but I don't really want to know, because I would rather have this discussion publicly. I don't want to know how people are voting on things, and that's what the questions and the comments and the running commentary that we get. I already feel like I know too much more than I should know, and I'm really only supposed to know or talk to up to one person. Sometimes we don't even do that just because to err on the side of caution. So, again, I'm soon ready to make a motion to move on, because we're at this point beating a dead horse, because we're just not going to view things the same way.
President Wade, I'm sorry. I have
Go ahead, Ms.
one thing
Schultz.
I would just like to add. I would like to add that Superintendent Lotzenheiser brought this up, that if we're asking to follow communication protocols, we should all follow all communication protocols that are listed, and not pick and choose the ones we want to follow.
Thanks, Ms. Schultz. Okay. So again, I hear the concerns are we follow protocol. Again, from my perspective and the questions that I have, because I can only speak to the questions that I have, district has been following protocol in every aspect of that. I don't feel personally that it's not. So from my perspective, I mean, I'm ready to make a motion ultimately to just move on from where we're at, unless somebody else has a different motion they wish to throw on the table. I again, wish to express district is following them. I can understand why you feel like it might not be, there are certain questions or we don't present them in the same way, but again, I just don't have the same number of questions as you, or I ask them here. Or they are literally presented in the information item, and any question I had is answered in that moment, and then I wait to see if I have more based off that and live my life. So does anybody have a different motion that they wish to make other than, I guess, keep following protocols as we are with our policies that are in place?
President Wade, I just want to make one more thing clear is when it's a consent agenda item, None of that is discussed at the board meeting, so there's no presentation, there's no explanation from admin, there's nothing, because it is a consent agenda item that gets one vote and it passes with no discussion, which is why I think it's important that information is shared. But I do agree, we can move on.
To be clear, those questions are shared for the consent agenda, right? Like, any question that you have that goes through is there. I don't have them often. The things I look at for consent agenda is who's paying for it when it comes to travel or purchases or those kinds of things. That information is in the consent agenda. I have to search a lot sometimes, especially if it's the vouchers. But either way, it is in the information present for the questions that I have. I don't think there hasn't been, like, there might be something that I have sent in if there's a specific question on that or whatever. I agree with you. That's why we have the question thing in place, to address that very specific thing. So, Christine, I'm probably going to butcher this in that, I mean, do we need to motion anything for this?
President Wade, you are agendized for possible action.
So, I mean, if there is no action, can do I motion
You
for?
don't have to take action, you can take action.
Great, so if I don't want to take action and there's nothing we need to do we just go on living our
And
lives?
just move on to the next
All right,
agenda.
great. Look at that. It's a first for us all here today. All right. 5.3. Discussion and possible action regarding policy IJJ, textbook supplementary materials, selection and adoption. Mr. Lotzenheiser, it says it's time to turn to you for comment.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify why we brought forward this agenda item and how we brought it forward, because the goal is to have a discussion as a governing board in public, everyone, again, because we don't ever get to have times to do this. This is the only time we can. And it really goes back to me when we're talking about policy and updating and changing policy. We had a request 2, maybe 3 meetings ago, I think, from Board Member Van Hook. I know it's been a while, but 3 meetings ago, let's say, that she would like to look and revise IJJ. And so that was asking a future agenda item that comes. And what I'm looking to do is say, when a board member is proposing to come and change a policy, how do we want to do this? Because I think it's really important for us to, as a group, is that a decision that the entire board would like to do to move forward? And then it basically will authorize me to work with the board member or work with my team to come up with then that first read. I've always felt it was interesting when we do the first read, it's not really an action thing, yet I felt like every time we do it, we're directed to do something because of it. And I don't know if that's necessarily following what we're supposed to do. I just know that's traditionally what we've done in the past. So Board Member Van Hook came, she gave us a red line version of what she'd like to see put in place in terms of that. And what I would asking the entire board, and I think this needs to be a process when we get in a future agenda item, ask if it's something where we have to come together and change policy. Is this a discussion? And I would love to have Board Member Van Hook be able to explain why she brought it forward, because I think that's important for everybody to hear. This goes back to, this is a very transparent way for us to have conversations together about what's happening, ask questions, ask clarifications on what we're looking for IJJ. And so with that, I would like to ask Board Member Van Hook if she would like to explain what's going forward. And then we look forward with the governing board and the decision they make. Is this something that's changed, or we can have this discussion together? And I think that's just a missing step that we have from, hey, I'd like an agenda item, and then to, hey, it comes from the first read, but the first read's an information item, which isn't an action item. So could you truly give us, the power to could turn around and change and to work on this as a team? I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Lutzenheiser. So at the couple meetings ago, when we approved the supplemental material, I shared concerns that our supplemental list is extremely long. And so I'd like to be able to see ways on how we can, go through the list and see how we as a district could possibly purge things that aren't being used, and kind of shorten that list a little bit. And, you know, my concern's not just like about one individual resource or supplemental material, but it's just being able to look at, you know, the whole process of approving and possibly being able to purge the list. And because we're not allowed to talk to each other outside of a board meeting, you know, I can't come and say, hey, what do you think about this? So this is our opportunity to take a look at my recommendations for the policy and determine, you know, what we think and what we want to change and be able to move forward from there. And I'm not sure if, do you want me to read the policy?
You know, I think we all have the policy, and we have a copy of the red line in there. And, you know, and the stuff that's obviously in black is what is currently in it, and the stuff that's in red is what's being added. And, you know, when you talk about the why, and this is why I appreciate that we can have a conversation here. When you talk about the why, and I can still remember this, you brought that up, and even Mr. Berkshire's, yes, when we sit and go through supplementals, we have a lot, and we do think that we need to have an internal process to be, how do we go turn around and keep them on, remove them? Are they being used or not? And we feel like there is some area to clean up from that. And so I actually tasked Mr. Berkshire, said, come forward with come up with a plan, especially considering that, you know, we used to have 11 instructional coaches that would have handled this. We're down to 4, come up with a plan. At the same time, Board Member Van Hook said, hey, here's what she would like to see in it. You know, and so from my perspective, when I look at it, I agree that we need to have a way that we look through our supplementals, and I don't think a supplemental approval should be a lifelong supplemental approval. I completely agree with that. What I look at when I look at this, I appreciate the language and thing that's put in here. I wonder, do we need to change the policy? Do I need to update the regulation and come back with a procedure that says, hey, here's the policy. The policy dictates basically that the superintendent will bring forward the removal of textbooks and supplementary materials. How can I turn around and define that for you more closely, which is where the regulation comes in. Remember, with regulations, they're not board member approved. Regulations are how we interpret the policy and we bring it back to you. And so I'd love to have that conversation about, do we need to change the policy to get to the goal that Board Member Van Hook wants, that honestly I agree with? We need to have a way, a more formal way for us to remove supplementals. And looking at Mr. Berkshire, he's agreeing because we've had those conversations, him coming into his position as the executive director next year of teaching and learning, looking at that. We do already have an approval process. We have a supplemental approval process, which has sparked all of what we're already doing. But how do we make sure that we're looking and vetting them? And so when we went through and looked at it, he would propose something, and I didn't want to bring it forward to you without having this discussion and having that ability to have it. But really, so what I'm after for this is let's have that discussion, and then you guys can make a decision. Do we want to move forward with changing the policy? Do we want to move forward with changing the regulation? What does the board want to do when looking at this policy?
President Wade.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, if I could just provide a little bit of context. So right now, Higley has the model IJJ policy from ASBA, which brings you into compliance with ARS 15, 721, and 722, which is elementary and high school textbook adoption, and then supplemental material approval. So remember, a few years ago, there were a lot of open meeting law complaints around textbook adoption, and the ASBA policy at the time didn't include the open meeting law requirement, which is a part of state law, so that was a recent change in the policy. So right now, you have the policy that brings you into compliance with state law. So if you wanted to modify the policy, that would be above and beyond what's required, and again, that's a decision of the board if it wants to do that. And then just to echo what your superintendent described, it's generally, the governing board sets policy, the superintendent creates the regulation to implement it. And certainly a board member can have good insights on how to implement that, but typically the board just gets notification of changes to the regulation as long as it's consistent with the policy.
Yeah, and I did provide those recommendations kind of to match the policy, but again, it was recommendations. First part of my change is it clarifies that instructional material approved by the district should be age appropriate and compliant with applicable Arizona laws. That's the first section, D, that was added. Second, they establish a review process for supplemental materials, including a 3-year review cycle, a baseline audit of materials currently in use, and periodic evaluation of alignment, implementation, cost, and effectiveness. And I know that from that meeting, it was said that a lot of our supplementals are free, but if we do have ones that cost, then that information can be shared. Third, the change provides a greater transparency through annual reporting on supplemental materials, including inventories, expenditures, usage, and recommendations for consolidation or removal. We already have the process in place where, I think I requested the inventory list, but that wasn't, I don't believe that was necessarily shared, but I did request a copy. Fourth, the change would require the new supplemental material requests identify their purpose, cost, expected outcome, and compliance with applicable law before being presented for approval. And then finally, they encourage continuity, scalability, and efficient use of resources by asking whether materials can be used beyond a single classroom, and by discouraging unnecessary duplication of a resource serving similar purposes. And this proposal does not ban material, restrict instruction, or prevent teachers from using supplemental resources. It creates a structured review and accountability process for materials we are already approving and using throughout the district. Because we're approving instructional resources district-wide, then I believe that we should know what they are, what they cost, whether they are aligned to state standards and applicable laws, how broadly they're being used, and whether they are producing intended results for students. And if they're not, then I would assume they would stop using them and then they'd end up on the purge list. So with that said, we can discuss, what possible changes.
Can I say something real quick?
Oh, yeah, sure.
I think, again, going back to the idea of making changes to a policy to develop a process, I want to make sure that when we develop policy, that's the big picture, and the process is the details that we can have, because that's basically what we're in charge of doing there. And I worry sometimes that when the policy becomes so prescriptive, because in the past sometimes that has gone through, which is why I want to have this conversation out here with everyone. When the process is defined or becomes very specific within the policy, I think that really narrows the ability for us to be able to look at it and fit it within the needs of what we're doing within the staff, and looking forward and moving forward to that. And I know that, when we go through the idea of within 90 days of this coming through, I know what our staff and our capability, especially when they don't work in the summers, and how we go forward. However, we can have a process to make sure that governing board members are updated about what's happening, and that can come forward within a process, not necessarily needing a policy change. Sorry.
Madam President. So first, I appreciate the fact what was mentioned earlier that at times we have been sort of, some of us have just said things and we proceed with doing that. We should vote on that like we're about to do right here. I appreciate that, and I appreciate Board Member Van Hook writing something down so we can discuss. But going sort of back to the conversation we had moments ago, this is something you and I talked about yesterday, and I was fully intent on bringing that up here publicly, as I think we should. You're talking about regulations and procedures. I know a little bit about how curriculum departments work and all of this. I would appreciate not changing the policy and letting Mr. Berkshire work on cycle. I believe the way this policy proposal is presented, it's cumbersome. I don't think it's feasible, especially with some of the cuts we've just had to make in our curriculum department. And I think there's already a process for much of this to be done. And for example, I think item D, to ensure that it's in compliance, that's just a given. I mean, that's state law, so it seems a little bit redundant. So I don't know that we need to change this. I would prefer to just maybe have a report sometime in the future that talks about what you've come up with, what you've seen. But some of these 90 days and 3-year cycles, I think it's a little bit, it's restrictive. And we already have these policies and procedures and people that do these things. So I'm not in support of changing the policy as presented.
President Wade, Mr. Berkshire, I wanted to make sure, I love the idea of this because I do want us to touch base with our resources. Again, fiscal responsibility, I just always want to make sure that we're touching base with that bottom dollar. And then, yes, the age appropriate. I know some resources, I don't know if many of them, but they are sometimes perhaps like updating, so just making sure that the age appropriateness is in there. I do like the D paragraph, that's a good one, but I really wanted to make sure that this was doable. I'm all about getting the numbers, seeing what works for the teachers and such like that. That way we can purge the list or just scale it back. What are your thoughts, Mr. Berkshire, or Superintendent? Sorry, I don't know who to ask questions to.
Thanks. I'm going to steal Marcus's thunder, because we've had plenty of conversations related to that. Yeah, when I look at it and the staffing that we have in order to be able to do this, I do think we need a very cyclical process so that things are reviewed in a meaningful time and in a meaningful way. And I don't have any problem with saying, hey, are we spending money? Ultimately, we want the same thing as you. Are we spending money on a resource we don't need? Right? I don't want that at all. And to be able to review it. I do think that as we look, we can basically mirror some of our adoption things as we're getting back into adoptions, where we can take a look and say, hey, we're going to address English this year, we're going to address math, we're going to keep going, and we're going to address those so they're cyclical on how we look at it. We know that teachers, there's been some changes in how we've done supplementals. And I think the changes in supplementals have helped slow down some of the implementation of supplementals. When a teacher brings forward a supplemental to us now, it's basically saying, can I use it next year, not can I use it next week?
That's part of our new policies, correct, Ms. Johansson?
And that has been put out within the last 2 years as we looked at supplementals and at novels, and we run those procedures through our ed services and our teaching and learning curriculum and instruction departments. And so, when I look at what a formal cycle is, yes, I would be able to come back and propose to you guys a formal cycle and give you an updated regulation, because there does need to continue to have that. And can we strengthen that and make it doable for the personnel that we currently have? People that we would look at handling this is not necessarily the classroom teacher. No, it's our teaching and learning department, our curriculum and instruction, our district content specialists, because that's part of what they need to do to be able to do it. Again, we have 4 of them now. We used to have 11. And so some of that needs to be taken into consideration to make sure that we can fit the demands of what we want. Ultimately, I think we all want the same things. We want vetted, appropriate curriculum used with our children. And if something is there that not, we need to be able to take it out. And if something's not used, we need to be able to take it out. I completely agree with that. And so whether you as the board want to direct me to change the policy and work on that, or if you want me to direct me to change the procedure or develop a process that's easier for everyone to understand, I'm good with that as well, but I wanted that to be your guys' decision.
Thank you, Mr. Lessenheiser. I wish to express gratitude to Ms. Van Hook in bringing it up. I think we should have something in place that looks at what we have and where that is. I think my concern would be in line probably with Mr. Glover in that I am resistant to change things policy-wise, again, that are quite restrictive. Where my concerns are, and I know some of you have expressed parts of that, is that we are making cuts. And so I struggle writing any kind of policy that has some restrictions in place, for example, in terms of timing, that we have to do certain things within a certain year time frame, when that doesn't really kind of keep in mind we may have to be using our supplementals longer than we intend. We may have to use things not that are inappropriate and all of that. And again, to be clear, a lot of the language for the things that you have concerns on, like being appropriate and all of that, is covered in other policies because, again, to Mr. Glover's point, it's the law. So we are doing that. So I don't believe that that language needs to be put into yet another policy because, again, we already have that. That is part of our policy, and I'm very grateful that we have those policies in place, and I think our new process of doing both books and supplemental really will help reaffirm some of those things. I'm resistant to your point, the staff we have available to accomplish some of these things, like the 90 days from when this policy takes effect. I don't see how that reasonably gets done, considering what the next 90 days are. Like, I don't think that's realistic. I also go, I don't think that we have to do that in any kind of an immediate process for it to have any kind of positive impact, or there is no negative impact by us not immediately going through what essentially is a long list of things that have been here for a while. And I think the benefit to not giving or to not necessarily giving a very restrictive time frame is allowing us to have the ability to do it with forethought instead of doing it with haste. Because again, as we started this evening, budget constraints are concerning. And as we move into next year, we're going to have really terrible conversations again, because we have no idea what state budgets are coming through. And we know for a fact that this is the end of our override. This is the last year that we have in front of us. And so being a teacher who has been in districts, this one, when financially things were not great, we had to essentially piece things together in whatever way that we could find. And so I am appreciative that this policy got started. I think the way and the process that it has impacted is great. I also am not on board with changing the policy, and I would always err on the people who do this job to be the ones to tell me what is reasonable to accomplish that task, because there are aspects to your job that I have absolutely no idea about. So the idea that I would come here and dictate how to do some of your job is hard, because I'm coming from a place of I don't know. With respect to legal, we are already in place with the policies that we have to ensure that we are following the law, to ensure that we are doing these things. So I'm inclined to allow district to decide how to accomplish a task, because they're the ones in the positions to do it. Ms. Schultz, do you have anything you would like to add, seeing as you're in space?
Yes, thank you. I think I echo a lot of the same concerns. And I agree with the changes that Mr. Watson-Heiser plans to make, but I'm good with keeping it the way it is for right now.
Ms.
I have
Schultz,
nothing else
can
to
you
add.
repeat?
Can you hear me or no?
I mean, we can, but you're like in a far off tunnel.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that better or no?
Yeah, that is.
Okay, all I said was I agree with a lot of things that have been discussed. I don't know that I need to belabor the points anymore. And I'm good with Mr. Lotzenheiser and Mr. Brookshire and what they're planning to do.
You mentioned restrictive, and is that in reference to the 90-day?
That is one example. Yeah.
I mean, the intention here is to have, instead of like outright denying the whole thing, like I would like to be able to have a conversation, obviously the 90-day thing, like we can cross out and that could be part of regulations, but I think that, and then Mr. Glover mentioned redundancy. If the district's already following these statutes, then codifying them into policy, I'm not sure why that would be an issue. And then you mentioned we already have it in other policies, but this policy specifically governs the selection and adoption of instructional material. So including that statement is appropriate for this policy and, legally compliant based on the intention of this policy. I do believe that we should have something in here related to a formal review of every 3 years. I think that would fall outside of regulations, which would be part of the policy. And then as part of the regulations, staff would discuss on how they go about doing that every 3 years. Mentioning that the superintendent shall establish a review schedule to ensure all supplemental materials are evaluated within 3 years. I mean, I think that that's a policy issue that directs the superintendent to then create regulations on how to do those things. And then directing the superintendent the continuity of enforcement and adoption requirements. I mean, these are all things that I believe need to be part of policy and not, I just went blank on the regulations. So I would appreciate not just saying we don't need any changes, but to consider some of my recommendations that would then allow the regulations to be then determined on how these things happen from the superintendent's standpoint.
Are you done?
Yeah.
Okay. So a couple of things that I wish to express to that. To be clear, Ms. O'Brien, our policy before any changes is compliant with the law.
It is. I will mention, so Board Member Van Hook's reference to, on section D, page 2, that subsection D, the paragraph that references statutory compliance, that cross-references policy IGD, which is about curriculum adoption, and that is, includes the prohibition of instructional materials that promote the overthrow of the United States, things like that. So, yes, policy IJJ, which is just about textbook adoption, that is in compliance with Arizona law.
Okay. I also, again, I'm kind of resistant sometimes putting things in multiple policies just because we've had the delightful experience of recognizing that the law has changed and then we're not always aware of just every single policy that specific thing is written in sometimes, because sometimes they're put in policies where we go, that doesn't seem like it needed to be here because it was already over here. So again, I am resistant to that in general. And to be clear, at least from my perspective and from what I've understood of the other folks who have spoken here today, nobody's saying that we shouldn't make the changes. I think we're just expressing that we should make the changes in a different way. I also think, while I hear you that 3 years seems reasonable versus the 5 years that district has proposed with their own stuff, district has to still keep functioning. We have other curriculum adoptions, we have other things that are going on constantly that are impacting students right now in a way that if this is a policy that can be in line with where things are, and again, we are making changes because I agree there are some of these things that need to get changed and updated. I just don't believe that we have to necessarily make changes in a way that we ultimately think was great to begin with, when again, we are not met with the reality of what that change looks like in real time. And so again, I think the people who are the ones who would have to make those changes in real time whilst in compliance with the law, when what is presented seems reasonable considering we had nothing to begin with, right? I commend the district for putting forth and taking information that is put together and where that comes from, but again, I am inclined to look at, A, we are in compliance with the law. I am very resistant to just changing or updating policy. Again, when there are so many and it gets convoluted, I think the policy should stick to what the things are. If we are compliant or not, if we need to make changes, those kinds of things, we can and update them. I don't believe the policy that as it stands needs to be changed in my opinion. I think the process and the procedures that we have do. And again, I'm inclined to defer to the folks who have to do it.
Well, President Wade, I just want to jump in real quick and say, again, I appreciate the conversation that's happening here because we don't ever get to do this, you know, and like I said, Mr. Berkshire and I have worked on something 3 years, 5 years, the direction of the board. I'm happy to follow through with that, but yeah, I think the goal of tonight basically is if you guys want me to continue, if it's continue to change the policy and say, please work with Board Member Van Hook as she's brought to us, and then we can work on it together. That's great. If it's not, that's kind of where we'd like to end with what we would like to do so that we have some clear direction on what the next steps for us are.
So with that, may I just make a motion that we vote on the proposed policy change?
What's your proposed? Like, can you clarify that in the motion? What?
Motion is to table it, to touch base with admin.
Well, we have.
I think tabling moves forward with direction. I just need some direction.
If I may just say something, President Wade, this is the first time I'm hearing anything about a 5-year proposal. So I'm not sure if you're aware of something that I'm not, but again, I think that when it comes to regulations, it's the direction that the staff takes. And I think that with this policy, it's the board giving instruction and direction to the superintendent. And I believe those are two different things. Where the superintendent could then go and change the regulations and say, okay, you know, it's not 90 days, it's every 120 days or 180 days, whatever it is, you know, I could see that being part of regulations. But again, you know, if 3 years is an issue, that could be changed to 5. But again, I think that from the board's perspective, that we should have something in policy that gives the superintendent instructions. And that's my intention here. And again, I would like to be able to, and as far as like cross-referencing policies, I mean, that's the whole purpose at the end of the policy, where we put the statutes that applies, where we put cross-reference policies so that we know where those changes need to be made. But, you know, and ultimately we can decide, but I my belief is that there should be some language in here that gives direction to the superintendent to then go back to his regulations and update those accordingly, and decide from there how they're going to implement and do things. But, you know, again, if we don't like the 3 years, we can do 5 years, but, and if that's what you're preferring, but I think there should be language in here that gives the superintendent direction.
President Wade, what if we I kind of like D in there. I don't think that that's a statute that's going to kind of go away, so I kind of like D in there. And then what about if we change the 3 years and the 3-year cycle to a 5 potentially at this point? And this is our first read, right? We've got a couple other reads. This isn't?
Actually, this isn't our first read. This is to provide me direction of whether you would like me to continue with looking at changing the policy, because, you know, typically policies, when policy changes come from us, it's because we had a law that changed and we got an advisory from ASBA, and so we bring those changes to you. This is a little different process when it's been recommended by a board member, so I just want to make sure that the entire board, or the majority of the board, right, is ready for us to move forward in doing it. Then after this, like the direction could be, do you want, would work with Board Member Van Hook or any of other board member, right, to put something together for me to bring to a first read.
I motion to have the superintendent bring something else for us together.
Could you, I couldn't hear you, sorry. Repeat.
I motion for the superintendent to reestablish this document and come back and present it.
So it's a table
Does-
until, is that what that is? Sure.
Like to work with me on it or to figure out how to?
I think we have an idea of kind of what you want, so I motion to table this to reword.
Madam President and Board Member Drummond, could I take a stab?
Yeah.
Okay. And correct me if I'm saying this wrong, I think you're directing the superintendent to take the feedback that the board has provided and bring back a possible first read or regulation of this policy at a future meeting.
Yes, absolutely. Did that motion count? Okay, I motioned it. I motioned to, yeah, motioned.
I'm so sorry. I don't know if I'm interrupting, but I did not hear the motion at all on the team.
You're not alone. I'm so sorry, you guys. I don't know the wording. I motion to table agenda item.
Hold on,
Mr. O'Brien's.
okay, let me take it. I'm going to try to say it again. Okay, so I think what you're saying is
I table. I'm sorry.
directing the superintendent to take the feedback of the board and possibly bring back policy IJJ or a regulation for a first read. Or actually, it wouldn't be a regulation for a first read, so policy IJJ for a first read.
I'm motioning to direct the superintendent to take the feedback from discussion possible actual, or from IJJ textbook. IJJ, textbook supplementary material selection and adoption, and come back with something that's suffice for the district. Okay.
So that motion is not seconded, which means we can further discussion, correct? Okay. So again, I am in a position in which I go, I hear you, why you like section D. To be clear, that's already included in other policies. We already have to ensure that the materials that are presented are in line and age appropriate. That is there. So I am resistant to updating the policy in that we are compliant with the law. What I think we should look at is having district come through with procedures and policy, or procedures to go through those materials. I don't feel as strongly in that it needs to be directed in policy. I think, to be fair, I recognize why there could be a world in which you have a superintendent who just does things in a way that's not compliant with what we as a board want. And good news, whomever is on the board at that period of time can make changes at any date. I have respect for the people in this position, and what I am more looking for is what district wishes to do in terms of regulating that policy, because again, they are in the position to know. So I would like to make a motion that we make no changes to policy IJJ. The
We don't change R.
IJJR would be false. I'm stopping with the motion. I have a question, Mr. Lotzenheiser or Mr. Berkshire, who can answer that, because you guys presented new regulation, or is that just old regulations what we have here?
No, yeah, the IJJR is the regulation that went along with governing board member Van
Okay.
Hook's recommendations. I have not brought forth
Okay.
the new regulation. I wanted this conversation to happen first, because if the conversation was, this is what we're doing, then we're good.
Okay.
So that's.
Yeah, I just provided,
Yeah.
I just provided regulations to match the changes that I made, just to make it easy so they could see how it moves to the regulations, but.
Okay, I appreciate that. So I'm going to try this again, and you can keep me honest. In that I motion that we, ultimately, I think I will keep similar language to what you have described, in that I motion that we have district provide a recommendation on IJJR in terms of reviewing supplemental material and what that process looks like. I do not feel that we need to come back with a policy read. So I'm looking at IJJR. It
Second.
was a terrible one.
It was okay.
So to be clear, the motion is for district to provide regulations on a supplemental review process. Mr. Glover has seconded. I hope you got that motion on there, because I did not write that down. That was a hot mess. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Motion carries 3-2.
President Wade, I do have a quick question. So the policy that is currently in our system, is that an updated one?
Madam President and Board Member Van Hook, I believe I reviewed your policy IJJ on the website, and it was the model ASBA policy.
And there's nothing in the policy that states, as far as like an annual report to the governing board, correct?
No, the policy does require, it says the superintendent will establish procedures for the purchase and distribution of all necessary textbooks, supplemental books, and other related instructional materials from the adopted list, free of cost to students. So, that the superintendent has discretion on those procedures, which could include a review.
Okay. All right, thank you.
5.4, approval of agreement for alternative transportation for private day students with Ever-Driven Technologies fiscal year 2027. Any questions or comments from the board before I motion?
I just had a quick question about this. So just so I understand, it's $250,000 for transportation services for 2 students and possibly homeless students? I think I saw that on the badge.
Our
contract with EverDriven are some of our SIT students, and then it depends. So it varies from year to year. So sometimes if transportation is unable to do a route that meets the needs of the student, we will contact EverDriven. So right now, I do believe it's 2 students, but the
that's what the
PO may be
contract
for
said.
more for that, because we add kids as the year goes on.
Okay, yeah, because I think the contract said 2 students. And then 250,000, and how is that covering just like the salary of the driver? Like what is covered under that amount? And then is that based on like mileage or like what is covered?
So it just covers the transportation of the student to the location in which they need to go to. So it's not pieced together based on those things. So it's a quote that we receive from the outside contract company.
Got it. So it doesn't matter how many miles is driven or?
The quote may change based on the location to which we're taking the student, but I don't know what that would be. I can find out more information on that quote.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just curious if this is just based on like the driver's salary, like I'm in the wrong business.
I do know that for our mileage for students that we do transport, that we do get reimbursed. I was able to get those figures. It's a little over $3 for this year per mile that we pay for. So we do get reimbursed for some of this cost through the government. And then for next year, the cost is $3.07 a mile to be exact.
And is that local or federal reimbursement?
I believe it is federal, but I will clarify that and report that back in status.
All right, thank you.
President.
Oh, go ahead. No, go.
President Wade, Ms. Miller, I just wanted to, I don't know if there's competitors out there, if we're actively looking out to just like reassess, like if this is the best budget. But yes, I believe this does not come out of the M&O. I'm pretty 100% sure. Oh. Don't worry about that. Sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. And I'm grateful for the knowledge, though I'm learning, but I don't want anybody to quote me here. Okay. Are we getting kind of other quotes or anything from other vendors or such? Are we touching base before the renewal of this contract? I just want to make sure I'm doing my due diligence. Again, fiscal responsibility. I know that that's always the district's underlying tone, but I just want to confirm publicly that we're touching base on that and that there's active rolling background checks on these drivers for all of these to protect the student safety.
Yes, so they are held to the same standards as they require the background checks and all of those things through the company. We are currently looking at other vendors that we could use that may be a little bit cheaper than EverDriven. So we are looking at pricing. Just because we have an agreement with EverDriven doesn't mean that we have to use them. It's just because they meet the threshold that we need governing board approval.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
President Wade, and I know that we had another vendor, I forget their name, Top Skip Drive. Is it same service, same type of service or not?
It is. I do not believe we use Hop Skip Drive.
Perfect, thank you.
Just for clarification for those who are listening, these are for students who have specific needs that end up going to schools that we cannot provide. And because these are kids in our district, we are legally obligated to provide them things. And if we cannot do that, we will take you where you need to go. So for those who are listening and what is this about, that is what that is.
President Wade.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
This is, the district does such a great job. By law, we have to accommodate to the youth, by law. And the district does such a good job with their homeless outreach and all that kind of stuff in compliancy to the law. And I'm so grateful for the efforts that Ms. Miller does, et cetera, for our SPED department and all, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to emphasize that I'm so proud in all the research and learning that I've done. I really did not realize how much the district does in these outreach little things, complying with the law. So I'm really appreciative of that.
Thank you, Vice President Jarman. President Wade, just so that you know, I lost my train of thought.
The students that are served by this.
Oh, yes. So whenever we have a student that requires private day transportation or any type of transportation, we always look in-house first. So we use contract agencies as a last resort in order to maintain that fiscal responsibility, so.
Thanks for the clarification.
Thanks.
But also, President Wade, and inside of this document, like on page 12, it gives examples of what a ride might cost, which is important to know, I think. I don't know if that's worth pulling up or not, but there's 2 examples specifically, District A and District B, and the percent responsibility and stuff. So it's smaller numbers than the larger number that was just talked about. And just because we're approving that number doesn't mean we have to spend it all.
Indeed. So, she's good. I motion to approve the agreement for alternative transportation for private day students with Ever-Driven Technologies fiscal year 2027.
Second.
That would be Ms. Jarman seconding. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion carries 5-0. This brings future agenda items. Does anyone have any requests for future agenda items?
President Wade, I would like to have a discussion about the land lease and sale that the voters approved in November and of 2024. I don't know how you want to present that, but I would like to know what we're considering and when we're considering it and all that comes along with that. Thank you.
Board Member Van Hook, you stole my thunder. There will be an executive session at the next meeting so that we can discuss that.
Okay, I motion to adjourn this meeting.
Again.
I'm going to give that to Ms. Van Hook. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion carries 5-0. Drive safe, everybody.